We've been in this series called Doubting God, and the I, the idea or the reality is that sometimes church is the most unsafe place to doubt God. At least you feel like you're judged for doubting God, and yet it should be kind of the most welcoming place for people who have questions and doubts. And I would say that all of us, at some level, have, if we're honest with ourselves, have experienced this part of our lives where we go, God, where are you? Can what I believe about you possibly be true? And it should be in this environment where we have safety to discuss that and experience those doubts. And so that's what we've been looking at over the last little bit. This week, as Steve was saying, we're going to talk about leaving Christianity. I thought that God and science was a tough topic. This is even tougher. This is one of those topics where I don't want to project on other people why they make the decisions they do. Right? So here I am talking about why people are leaving Christianity, which is something I have never done. So I don't want to illegitimize. There's probably a better word, their experience and why they left. I don't want to put words in their mouths, and so you need to listen to me in a way that you recognize I'm not an expert in leaving Christianity because I've never done it. And people have valid reasons for making the decisions they make. And I don't want to discredit any of that. There's an interesting phenomenon, as Steve was talking about this. I don't know if it's being here in Bancroft or if it's that kind of our church setting, kind of the non-denominational churches experience less decline in membership and in attendance, but people have been leaving Christianity for years, and it's been in the last few years where it's gotten closer to home for me that I woke up to that reality. But it's not something new at all. There's a book that is out called Leaving Christianity. It's written by Brian Clark and Stuart McDonald, who are professors in Toronto, who looked at the 2001 census and looked at the Canadian results of people who are leaving Christianity, and they went, wow, what's going on? And so they started to dig into that. They used the data that came out in the 2011 census and put together a book that came out in 2017. And then I've heard conversations with Brian especially talking about what's going on in our culture and not necessarily digging into the whys, but this is actually what's happening in Canada. Back in 2001, 77.1% of people in Canada identified as Christian. Then you see a steady decline to 67.3% in 2011. And then in 2021, it went to 53.3. The bigger one for me, some people could look at this and they could say, well, that's kind of an immigration stat, right? People are not Christian as much anymore, they're more Muslim. But when you look at that middle illustration, 35% of Canadians identify as having no religious affiliation. So this is not what we would normally look at as an immigration issue. People who have been in the faith, who have grown up in Christianity, have made the decision to walk away from Christianity. And it's been this steady progression for years. Like I said in my introduction, I can't directly answer those questions, but there's been several surveys over the years that have identified reasons why people leave organized religion, leave Christianity. Barna, which is a research group in the States, back in 2011, put together their survey, and their stuff is very well executed surveys. And they found there were kind of 6 top reasons in the States why people were leaving Christianity. This number one reason was churches seemed overprotective. Defining characteristics of teens is unprecedented access to ideas and worldviews, as well as their prodigious, is that right? Look at that. I did poor in English, by the way. A consumption of popular culture. With the whole world coming to our homes, people have been exposed to new ideas, and to be honest, church culture, the culture itself, was very comfortable for people, especially back in 2001. And all of the new things were be given to the church and to teens and peoples in their 20s. There was this battle between, well, why would you want to change it, right? I love the way we do things. Don't attack my church culture. There was that side, and then there was this new thing, like, you don't want to change it because you've never seen anything else, right? And there were these concepts that were coming into the church, and there was just a huge pushback. I can remember, and depending on your Christian experience or your church experience, you can probably look back at the battles that were given about whether the piano should be played in a certain service, or whether drums should be in church, or all kinds of things, right? There were just all kinds of things. Number 2, teens and 20-someths' experience of Christianity is shallow. And you could see that from the arguments that came out, right? It seemed a lot more cultural. What people were fighting to protect were cultural issues, not theological issues in many cases. They tried to make them theological issues, but they weren't. They were just culture. And so Christianity became more of a social club than something that was impacting the community. Number 3, churches come across as antagonistic to science. And you can see, as people go into higher education and they see things that make sense to them from scientific investigation, and the church just says it can't be true, it's not right, because that's not what I was taught in Sunday school. Number 4, young Christians' church experience related to sexuality are often simplistic and judgmental. And in this world, especially with the internet, and especially with popular entertainment, there is a whole other world that is given to us as normal that didn't resonate and doesn't necessarily resonate with the church culture. And there's this whole tug of war trying to rationalize how to live in the culture they experience everywhere outside of church, and then live in church in that experience. Number 5, they wrestle with the exclusive nature of Christianity. Number 6, the church feels unfriendly to those who doubt. And I talked about that earlier. The 6 reasons why back in 2011 people were leaving the church, and if you could have a conversation with people, I don't think any of those issues are core to our faith. Now, I don't know if you remember this. There was this pandemic a few years ago, and there was a whole shift in what happened within Christianity. This data that we have from 2011 doesn't necessarily mesh with why people would be leaving Christianity today. So there's a survey. Brandon Flannery is a gay ex-pastor who writes for various articles. Baptist Global is one of them. But he did a survey finding out why people were leaving the church. Now, you got to recognize that there's probably a bent to the people that would read his stuff and would do the survey, but it's interesting that This was his survey of final reasons why people left the church. LGBTQ was at the top of the list. Now, like I was saying, perhaps a significant number of the people that would be reading his articles and participating in his surveys would probably rank that the highest, but it's not, it's a reality. It might not rank as number one in a survey that was taken widely, but it would definitely be an issue for why people are leaving the Christianity. For some of the ways that we have treated this community. Behavior of believers is another one. Politics. There was an election after 2011 down in the States, which was pretty divisive, and that caused a lot of people to leave the church as well. Faith leadership. If you look at celebrity pastors, especially in the States and in Canada, actually, if you look at celebrity pastors, most of them over the past 10 years have fallen because of something that's gone on in their private lives, whether it's an affair or something financial. And you go, wow, if these are the people leading the church, why would I participate in this? These are all valid questions, valid reasons. Intellectual integrity, mental health, independence, women's rights, scriptural issues, civil rights, exposures to different ideas, and then people have been hurt in the church. There is no way that I can this morning go, okay, let's address this issue, or let's address this issue. There's been a practice in Christianity called deconstruction, right? Which I guess I would prefer to call renovation, but it's the idea of looking at your faith and the things you believe and why you believe them and stripping them away and then building your faith back up. The problem is with a lot of deconstruction, it actually removes the foundation of our faith. So this morning, my thoughts are, why don't we just tear everything away for this conversation and just hit the foundation? And then we can talk about why people leave that or don't leave that. I think when you divide up the main reasons why people leave Christianity, for me, I look at it and I see two main categories. One is being disillusioned with Christian culture. The other is being disillusioned with God. And so I want to focus on the second one to start with, right? Because to be honest, as I look at the list of things, this is probably less of an issue for most people leaving Christianity, although it can be a significant issue for many people. Which brings us back to the question that we had this morning. If you are disillusioned with God, then you must have an expectation of God that doesn't get satisfied somehow. Right? You can't be disillusioned from something that you didn't have an expectation for. Right? If you don't think God exists, then you're not going to be disillusioned by the fact that you don't think he shows up. So, to be disappointed with God, to be disillusioned with God, there must be some way that you have formed concepts of God. And, as we talked about this morning, there are a lot of ways that our concepts of God have been formed, right? I find it interesting for me and maybe for others, how many concepts of God for me have been developed through music and through songs, right? Randy Travis, for Pete's sake, right? So there are times that I will have a talk that I want to prepare, and I'm going, okay, there's a verse somewhere. What is that verse? And I will end up Googling or searching in the Bible for, God helps those who help themselves, something like that. And it's not there, right? Or on a hill far away stood an old rugged cross. It wasn't even a hill, all right? How much of our concept of God comes out of just music? And we don't know the difference. When we have a concept of God, we don't necessarily go, oh, I think I learned that here. It's just a concept of God, a belief about who God is or what God does. And for many of us, for so many of us, our concept of God is our own value system. Right? I can be disappointed with God because God doesn't live up to my values. And we lay out our own expectations on God and how He should manipulate our lives or care for the people around us based on how we would manipulate our lives or care for the people around us. Our concepts of God significantly are not based on what God says about Himself. If we are disillusioned with God, it is because we have an expectation of God that God somehow doesn't live up to. Now, we talked about this a little bit a while ago, but faith is not the product of clarity and control. My faith is not based on if I pray, then God will respond the way I ask Him to respond. But yet, a lot of people who are disillusioned with God say, I prayed and prayed and prayed for this, and it didn't happen. And in the Bible, it says that if I pray and pray and pray for this, then it's going to happen. But you haven't read the whole Bible. My expectations of God sometimes are that God should respond to my agenda. And when He doesn't, I am disillusioned with God. Faith is not the product of clarity and control. Faith is actually a trust that helps navigate uncertainty. This is what God calls us into. Not that He will go, okay, I've got your life mapped out for you, and here's the plan, and this is how it's all going to happen. And if you get sick, well, you just need to ask that you won't be sick, and I will make you better. Right? That God doesn't operate that way. And God says that He will keep you in the palm of His hand, but that doesn't mean that in the palm of His hand you won't experience things that cause pain. He is just holding you through it. I hesitate to talk about this, but our experience over the last 6 months has been, in many ways, awful. And in many ways, God revealing. And God has not at all operated the way I would have asked Him to operate. And then, at the same time, He operates in ways that are far beyond my expectations of how He should operate and how He holds us in the palm of His hand. It's not about the things we experience. It's about the God we experience in those things. And God's mind is not our mind. In Isaiah 40, it says this: Who has measured the waters in the hollow of His hand, or with the breadth of His hand marked out the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as His counselor? That word Spirit, maybe this rings a little more bells. Who can fathom the mind of the Lord, or instruct the Lord in His counsel? In James chapter 3, and you can read through this, as James is talking about, if somebody among you is wise and has wisdom, then let it show up in their good works. But beware of this: if their wisdom leads to self-gratification or to self-preservation, if their wisdom is directed towards improving themselves, then that's not really God's wisdom. And then it goes on to say this, verse 17, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Jesus says, or Paul says, or James says, who wrote this? Not James. James says that if your wisdom is leading to some form of conflict, then it's not God's wisdom. Because God's wisdom promotes peace. If your wisdom leads to some sort of anger and fight or division, then it's not God's wisdom, is what James says. Because God's wisdom leads to peace. There's a story that I heard many years ago by Max Lucado that he writes down. And I've asked Alicia if she, when she comes up to lead us in another song, if she would read this story about the woodcutter's wisdom to help us understand maybe a different concept of God than the one that you learned in Sunday school and through music.
Once there was an old man who lived in a tiny village. Although poor, he was envied by all, for he owned a beautiful white horse. Even the king coveted his treasure. A horse like this had never been seen before. Such was its splendor, its majesty, its strength. People offered fabulous prices for the steed, but the old man always refused. "This horse is not a horse to me," he would tell them. "It is a person. How could you sell a person? He is a friend, not a possession. How could you sell a friend?" The man was poor, and the temptation was great, but he never sold the horse. One morning he found that the horse was not in the stable. All the village came to see him. "You old fool," they scoffed. "We told you that someone would steal your horse. We warned you that you would be robbed. You are so poor. How could you ever hope to protect such a valuable animal? It would have been better to have sold him. You could have gotten whatever price you wanted. No amount would have been too high. Now the horse is gone, and you've been cursed with misfortune." The old man responded, "Don't speak too quickly. Say only that the horse is not in the stable. That is all we know. The rest is judgment. If I've been cursed or not, how can you know? How can you judge?" The people contested, "Don't make us out to be fools. We may not be philosophers, but great philosophy is not needed. The simple fact that your horse is gone is a curse." The old man spoke again. "All I know is that the stable is empty and the horse is gone. The rest I don't know. Whether it be a curse or a blessing, I can't say. All we can see is a fragment. Who can say what will come next?" The people of the village laughed. They thought that the man was crazy. They had always thought he was a fool. If he wasn't, he would have sold the horse and lived off the money. But instead, he was a poor woodcutter, an old man still cutting firewood and dragging it out of the forest and selling it. He lived hand to mouth in the misery of poverty. Now he had proven that he was indeed a fool. After 15 days, the horse returned. He hadn't been stolen. He had run away into the forest. Not only had he returned, he had brought a dozen wild horses with him. Once again, the village people gathered around the woodcutter and spoke. "Old man, you were right, and we were wrong. What we thought was a curse was a blessing. Please forgive us." The man responded, "Once again, you go too far. Say only that the horse is back. State only that a dozen horses returned with him. But don't judge. How do you know that this is a blessing or not? You see only a fragment. Unless you know the whole story, how can you judge? You read only one page of the book. Can you judge the whole book? You read only one word of a phrase. Can you understand the entire phrase? Life is so vast, yet you judge all of life with one page or one word. All you have is a fragment. Don't say that this is a blessing. No one knows. I am content with what I know. I'm not perturbed by what I don't." "Maybe the old man is right," they said to one another. So they said little, but deep down they knew he was wrong. They knew it was a blessing. 12 wild horses had returned with one horse. With a little bit of work, the animals could be broken and trained and sold for much money. The old man had a son, an only son. The young man began to break the wild horses. After a few days, he fell from one of the horse and broke both legs. Once again, the villagers gathered around the old man and cast their judgment. "You were right," they said. "You proved they were right. The dozen horses were not a blessing. They were a curse. Your only son has broken his legs, and now in your old age you have no one to help you. Now you are poorer than ever." The old man spoke again. "You people are obsessed with judging. Don't go so far. Say only that my son broke his legs. Who knows if it's a blessing or a curse? No one knows. We only have a fragment. Life comes in fragments." It so happened that a few weeks later, the country engaged in war against a neighboring country. All the young men of the village were required to join the army. Only the son of the old man was excluded because he was injured. Once again, the people gathered around the old man, crying and screaming because their sons had been taken. There was little chance that they would return. The enemy was strong, and the war would be a losing struggle. They would never see their sons again. "You were right, old man," they wept. "God knows you were right. This proves it. Your son's accident was a blessing. His legs may have been broken, but at least he is with you. Our sons are gone forever." The old man spoke again. "It is impossible to talk with you. You always draw conclusions. No one knows. Say only this. Your sons had to go to war, and mine did not. No one knows if it's a blessing or a curse. No one is wise enough to know. Only God knows." The old man was right. We only have a fragment. Life's mishaps and horrors are only a page out of a grand book. We must be slow about drawing conclusions. We must reserve judgment on life's storms until we know the whole story. I don't know where the woodcutter learned his patience, perhaps from another woodcutter in Galilee, for it was the carpenter who said it best. "Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." He should know. He's the author of our story, and he has already written the final chapter.
You're worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Sing You're Worthy.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, Jesus.
I might have a shocker for you here. Are you ready for this? Faith and religion are not the same thing. Faith and religion are not the same thing actually at all. Some people will have come up to me and have said, so explain to me why the Christian religion is better than the Muslim religion, which is better than Hinduism or Buddhism. And here's the shocker. The fact is that Christian religion in itself is no better than any of them. Religion in itself really holds no significant value. Nobody's thrown rocks at me yet. We're okay. Faith is personal. Religion is relational. And if we are in a relational experience, that means you are around people. And if you are around people, you will get hurt. Pretty much guaranteed. For sure guaranteed, you will disagree with people. It is hard to find two people. In fact, I'm not sure if it's even possible to find two people in this room who could sit down and agree on everything. You might get down to what's your favorite color, right? And that'd be blue and red, and then you're done. And imagine there are some mathematical wizards here, I think. I don't know what the odds are of, in this group of people, if you could do the math on how many things we're going to disagree on. It is phenomenal. In this group of people, we will have differences of opinions on just about everything. And that happens in religious contexts. And people are going to disappoint you. Why? Because it's relational. And when you're in relationships, you will be around people who don't live up to either real expectations you should have for them or expectations that you've placed on them. I really understand why people leave religion. I get it. You're going to get hurt. Faith is personal, though. So you can't be in conflict with yourself when it comes to faith. Faith is something that is deeply personal. And when we talk about Christianity, if we're talking about the religion, I get it. Walk away. You're going to get hurt. But if we're talking about the foundation of our faith, or if we're talking about faith itself, I really struggle to understand how you walk away from that. And again, no disrespect. It's just that I don't get it. When we look at faith, again, when we break this down to a foundational level, when we look at faith, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. This is a biblical definition. It starts in Hebrews chapter 12. This is not a relational experience. This is a personal experience. This is just you. This isn't dependent on the group around you. This is a confidence in what we hope for and an assurance of what we do not see. And then it goes on down in Hebrews and it talks about how faith itself, not participation in a church service, but faith itself is what connects you with Christ. See, this church service is not faith. You may have come to faith at a setting like this. You may have come into relationship with Jesus. You may have grown your faith in this site of experience, learning from other people around you. This may be where you express your faith, which is kind of what I'm doing this morning, which is what we were all doing when we were singing. But this is not faith. This gathering is not faith. Faith is something deeply personal. It doesn't belong to the Bridge Community Church. It doesn't belong to any specific denomination. It doesn't even belong to only people who gather for church services. Faith is something personal. It's a confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. And then it goes on to say this, and without faith, it is impossible to please God. So you can come to church, you can participate here, you can volunteer, you can, send encouraging messages to the pastor. That has zero value outside of this personal relationship, this personal faith. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So if we're going to look at faith, and we already talked about how our concepts of God are like messed up, right? We all have kind of gathered around a whole bunch of stuff that builds into our concepts of God, and there are pieces of our concepts of God that are wrong. Sorry to tell you that. That might get a nasty email, but it's true. And I love this passage in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, and it's off of this that it leads us into a whole bunch of stuff, because all of a sudden it opens up all of creation for us to understand the concepts of God. So, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now, for me, and I've read through the Bible a few times, there's one theme that dominates in revealing what it is to be in relationship with God. There's this one theme that we see everywhere in all of creation, any society that you go into, and for me that concept is marriage. And what's interesting is when you look to understand what it is to be in relationship with God, God created this environment and this world and our very existence based on marriage, or at least sexuality. If it didn't exist, we would have died out many, many generations ago, right? Would have started with one person, gone to two, and then that's it. So I want to show you this. The second chapter in the Bible talks about marriage. It says, the man said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she is taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. I actually just included 25 because I'm a guy, and I think that's funny. Okay. It's not really part of my talk. And then, the second last chapter of the Bible says this. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of seven last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." It's like the second chapter of the Bible, if you're reading from cover to cover, in the second chapter of the Bible, you're going to get this whole concept of marriage, which filters throughout the entire Bible. When God talks about the Israelites and how they had turned their backs on him, he talks about it being adultery. God always discusses his relationship with people in terms of marriage. Right? And here's the interesting thing is that anywhere you go in society, Donald Brown, who is a professor of anthropology in University of Southern California, I think, wrote a book called Human Universals, and he had this list of universal things that you will experience in any society where you go anywhere in the world, right? And I think there were 264 of them, something like that. And they would include things like any society you go to, people will prepare food and they will sit together and eat it. There will be a structure to how family exists. And these will be universal things. And marriage is one of those human universals. Any society you go to, what is talked about in Genesis chapter 2 is lived out everywhere in the world. It's a picture for us to understand the God who created us has a desired relationship for us. And he describes it as marriage. And then in the second last chapter of the Bible, it says exactly that at the end, this is what it looks like. This is what marriage is all about. The imagery of marriage is all about that God and his bride are together, brought together. And it spills out, again, in the New Testament. In Ephesians chapter 5, this is like the counseling passage for married couples, essentially. And in Ephesians chapter 5, it says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church." In other words, if you are married, then you are to love your wife just like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And then a little further down in verse 31, it says, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother," it's quoting Genesis chapter 2, "and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." This is a profound mystery, Paul says, but I am talking about Christ and the church. Right in the middle of this passage about marriage. He says, marriage is given to us as a way of understanding God and his desire to be with us. And let me say, we live in a broken world. If you have struggled in marriage, if you've been divorced, this is not a judgment on you. This is not to say, sorry, God doesn't love you. See, if the message of Jesus says anything, it is that we who are Christ followers are to love, especially the brokenhearted. And if anybody from any culture comes into this gathering of Christians and feels judgment rather than love, then we're doing something wrong. This is not judging. We live in a broken world. We are all broken. And it's out of that brokenness that we crave something that isn't broken. And if you have been in a broken marriage, there is something in you that understands at a deeper level the desire to be in a whole relationship. And that resonates with Christ. Because that's Christ's desire. And if you look at the relationship that Christ has had with his people, it is full of his people turning their backs on him and walking away. And if you have experienced that, you understand at a deep level the pain that God feels and the desire God has for something better. This is a profound mystery. But I am talking about Christ and the church. And you pull this together, united to his wife, and Christ and the church, and it gets pulled into this. No wonder that in Philippians chapter 2, Paul talks about being united with Christ. It's an identical relationship. It is the exact same word that Paul uses to describe what it's to be united to your wife, and he uses the exact same word to say united to Christ. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in the Spirit and one in mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking for your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. You want a prescription for a healthy marriage? This is it. But it doesn't just happen. You don't just say, I do, and all of a sudden, this is what you're going to experience. Right? It takes time. There's this concept of being united. And in 2 Corinthians 5, it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is there. If we understand this, here's the thing. When Jen and I got married, we ceased being Jen and Kevin and became Jen and Kevin. And there's something significant about this because we had nothing, but we shared a bank account with the little bit that we had. We assumed each other's debts. We actually became this new entity. This is this Jen and Kevin entity. And it is different than Jen and Kevin. It is something brand new. When I was united with Jen, I actually became a son-in-law to her parents. And in many cultures, that's just you become a son. When I was united with Christ, I became a child of his parent. I became a child of God. When I was united with Jen, I became a co-heir with her, and we're hoping her parents have a lot of money. When I became united with Christ, I became a co-heir with him. And when you read through the Bible, it just amplifies this. We understand what it is to be in relationship with God because although it's hard to experience in this broken world, we have a concept of what it is to be in a whole marriage. And if we are in a whole marriage, the closer we can get to that, the deeper we can understand what it is to be in relationship with God. So the relationship works like this. The core of our faith, what faith really is this. It starts with being united with Christ. And I know we live in a world where we think intimacy should lead into commitment. Right? We kind of do practice run of marriage before we get married. And I get it, it's cultural, it is what it is, but that's not what the Bible describes. And what the Bible describes is this, is that it starts with faith, it starts with accepting the proposal, it starts with just being united with Christ, not because we are completely intimate with Christ. In fact, Christ doesn't even offer real, true intimacy outside of unity with him. We start with, if you look at culturally in the Bible, how it talks about marriage, it starts with two people who hardly even know each other. And they are united together the same way that in our relationship with Christ, it's not about absolutely certainty about who Christ is. It's simply a trust that he cares about us. but you don't know that. Faith is not certainty. Faith is taking a big gamble. It's about uniting yourself with Christ. Uniting yourself with Christ results in a shared identity, the same way that we became Jen and Kevin, that we shared debts, we shared joys, we shared family. We couldn't have our family apart from being united. We have a shared identity. Throughout history, there's been different names for that. Early in the church, it was Christian. We took on the name of Christ. Shared identity, shared debt before Christ even becomes intimate with us. He assumes our debts. He takes them on. And we assume his mission. We take them on. Shared identity then leads into intimacy. True faith doesn't grow out of intimacy. True faith grows in intimacy. And that intimacy is this really incredible thing. It can be life-producing. And in case this isn't clear, there's some sexual connotations to this. Right? Isn't it interesting that sexuality can be the most amazing, absolutely beautiful, life-producing relationship, and it can be the source of the most horrific abuses known to mankind. Kind of like religion, isn't it? And the reality is that when we place sexuality or intimacy above commitment, it doesn't have the flavor it's supposed to have in revealing God's desired relationship with us. Outside of a committed relationship, sexuality is primarily about self-gratification. Inside a committed relationship that is serving the one you're united with, it is much more about the other person. Kind of like religion. Intimacy ultimately leads to shared passions. See, being connected to Jen has changed my life. She has introduced me to people I would have never, ever met, and taken me to places I would never have gone to. And not because all of a sudden I'm comfortable going to these places. I'm a pretty shy guy. But she drags me all kinds of places. And I don't go there because it's my idea or I'm comfortable going. I go there because I'm comfortable and trusting Jen. It's not about where I'm going, it's about who I'm going with. And over the last 31 years or so, I've become more like Jen. I've grown as we became more intimate, as we have grown and done life together. I have become more like her. The same is true of faith. I don't instantly become like Christ when I say, I'm in. It's a process. It's a leap of faith. And it starts with uniting with Christ. It's a shared identity, it's intimacy, and it's shared passions. Romans 10 in the Message says this: the word that saves is right here, as near as the tongue in your mouth, as close as the heart in your chest. It's the word of faith that welcomes God to go to work and set things right for us. This is the core of our preaching. Say the welcoming word of God. Jesus is my master, embracing body and soul God's work and doing in us what he did in raising Jesus from the dead. That's it. You're not doing anything. You're simply calling out to God, trusting him to do it for you. That's salvation. It's simply uniting yourself with Christ. It's taking him up on his proposal. with your whole being, you embrace God, setting things right, and then you say it right out loud, God has set everything right between him and me. Scripture reassures us, no one who trusts God like this, heart and soul, will ever regret it. That's exactly the same, no matter what the person's religious background may be. The same God for all of us, acting the same incredibly generous way to everyone who calls out for help. Everyone who calls help, God gets it. And that's it. You see, we are simply called to say yes to God. And it doesn't matter what your religion is, it's about the work of Jesus in relationship to yourself. It's not about religious practice. It doesn't matter if you come to church here. It doesn't matter if you go to church anywhere. Your faith grows when it's in relationship with other Christians. How you do that doesn't determine whether you have faith or don't have faith. I remember Erwin McManus, somebody came up to him and said, okay, you know, this Christian thing, I think it's good, but I need to know something. Like, what about other religions, like Muslims? What happens with that? And Erwin said, hey man, Jesus is as available to Muslims as to anyone else. Jesus is not about Christian culture. It's not about Christian religion. Jesus is about a relationship with him that brings you into a right relationship with God. I don't know what that looks like. I just know this. That God says that he has revealed himself and is revealing himself to everyone. And the God that I know, that I've gotten to know over the relationship that I've had with him for 50 years, tells me I don't have to worry about whether other people will have opportunity, because the God that I know, that I've grown to trust, gives everyone an opportunity. It's probably not here at the Bridge Community Church, though that might be the case for you. God is calling you. Jesus is offering his life for you to be united with him and to live out a life that is devoted to one another.